I see it changing.
Do you see it changing?
Yes, I do.
That's interesting. Yeah.
After Trump leaves in 3 years, will there be like a series of Trumps, or will the party revert to what it was?
So recently, Tucker Carlson contemplated and discussed what will happen to the Republican Party after Trump. Who will inherit Trump's populist energy on the right? And he also gets into how the Republican Party has changed and how the Democratic Party has changed. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Oh, will the Republican Party revert to what it was before Trump? Oh, first of all, I think Trump is such an unusual person that I don't think he can really be replicated, even if, no matter how hard anyone tries. He was a. I mean, he came to prominence because he had an incredible amount of, what used to be called brass at a time when brass was what was required. There are other people who have sort of who seem to have more of the qualifications that a politician would require. That is like patience and like an understanding of policy and things like that. You had people like Ron DeSantis seem to be offering that to the Republican Party for a while, but it's not what the country felt it needed. The country felt it needed brass. The country felt it needed someone to come in and insult, topple, and break the old establishment.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. Trump does have a unique energy, unique style, swagger, but policy-wise, I don't think he's been that much different than the Republican establishment, despite how much he's raked the neocons over the coals. He started a new war with Iran. He bombed Yemen for a month. He continues to prolong the war in Ukraine by talking about security guarantees. That's a non-starter for Russians, and he's not trying to end that war, despite all of his good rhetoric on that. Whether the party itself does revert to the neocon style, I sure hope not. For all my faults with the Republican Party, I like, at least the auspices, the appearances, and the optics of rejecting neocons. Of course, they're incorporated into government. Marco Rubio's there, Mike Huckabee is there, Mike Waltz was there, but I like the rejection of the neocons and the ascension of the populists for the most part. But I agree, Trump really can't be replicated, so it's a matter of who inherits that energy after him, whether it's J.D. Vance, who most people think, or Vivek Ramaswamy, or someone else than that. That's an open question.
Was that establishment broken, like after Trump?
Well, it's still in progress. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, this is something you know a lot more about than I do, but I mean, if I look at Trump 1, I would say that it was an almost utter failure on Trump's own terms. That is, I mean, he used that list that Leonard Leo and others had given him to fortify the Supreme Court as a more or less conservative force, and he nominated a lot of judges.
Well, most of his supporters would like Gorsuch, but not Amy Coney Barrett by any stretch. So, his legacy, even among right-wing standards, might not be the best on that. But yeah, I do believe it was a disaster. It was not all Trump's doing. It was Russiagate undermining him for 2 to 3 years, that farce. But at the same time, he didn't help his case by actually arming Ukraine, by surrounding himself with people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, swamp creatures to the maximum degree that were designed to lead him down terrible paths and a terrible presidency in general. I think the best, brightest moment was normalizing relationship with North Korea. Trump shaking the hand of Kim Jong-un. Whatever you want to say about totalitarianism in North Korea, I like warm relations with nuclear powers. I would want that kind of relationship with China and Russia too, such that we don't fan the flames of nuclear war with multiple nuclear powers.
But I don't think that he ever understood where the actual levers of power in the government were. And so the same deep state that he had complained about was as strong on the day he left office as it was on the day that he arrived. And so one had the impression that he'd learned absolutely nothing. And so what has happened under Trump too is one of the most astonishing surprises in the history of American politics. Now, in Brexit, you had a guy who was kind of a genius in the workings of British government named Dominic Cummings, who was able to say, well, no, you don't need to win a majority in Parliament on this one. You just need to control the cabinet office, etc. Trump never had such a person, but apparently, and the details are still not clear how, apparently he acquired one or several in the course of his 4 years out of power. I think Steve Bannon is correct to say that the 4 years out of power were in Trumpian terms were a great blessing for him.
Why? It doesn't seem like that's panned out in terms of policies. We still have the same warfare state, the welfare state, the regulatory apparatus. We still have corporate welfare in the hundreds of billions of dollars. We still have a genocide in Israel and an Israel first mentality that infects the culture. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing policy play out to the extent that Trump's best promises were kept. They weren't. We're still in Ukraine, funding that war, sending money into Zelensky's coffers. Doge made basically no cuts, and the cuts they made were offset by a huge Pentagon budget, the big abominable bill, the CR that Trump whipped Republicans to support and dragged Massey for having the guts and the cojones to say, stick to your principles on cutting government. That's where we are. I've seen nothing astonishing about this.
So there's someone, I mean, maybe Steve Miller is a candidate for this, who has the most tremendous Machiavellian understanding of what can be done inside government. I mean, the speed with which, USAID was dismantled, which in what seems to me, it was not really a cost-saving operation. It was like a purge of a certain tendency in government. Was really, whatever you think of it as an ideological operation, it was a tremendously expert operation.
That one I have to give him credit for. I think that's the best thing Trump has done is purge USAID. USAID has served as the facilitator, the CIA's financial wing, to enact regime change operations across the world. We saw USAID give $5 billion to Ukraine, $15 billion to Syria as part of Operation Timber Sycamore that had the CIA siding with Al-Qaeda against Assad to try to depose Assad because that's what Israel wanted. Dismantling USAID is the best thing Trump's done. I have to give him credit for that, with the one caveat that, a few of the 100 employees that, or maybe even a few thousand of USAID were rolled up under the State Department, so they still exist, but dismantling USAID was phenomenal. That's the one big thing I will give Trump credit for.
In terms of, government rejiggering, the executive orders that he has canceled and the new ones that he has passed in order to give a new reading to affirmative action. And I would say that that affirmative action was in many ways the key institution of American government of the last half century. To render it inoperative, even if he hasn't fully killed it, is a constitutional revolution. So yeah, things are still in progress. It's very difficult to see whether an operation like, say, deportations, whether that is going to accelerate or whether Trump is really running out of gas and this is going to, but it's.
Yeah, the deportations are not happening. I think that's clinging to a false hope. There's 40 million people illegally here right now. You're not seeing mass deportations. You know what kind of deportations you're seeing? Selective deportations for critics of Israel. Entertaining them being sent to the deepest dungeon, the worst prison in Honduras. That happened several months ago where 200 people were sent down there. or that was at least on the table. As far as affirmative action, yeah, I mean, if you cancel affirmative action within the executive branch, that's great, any kind of schemes like that. But Trump doesn't have unilateral legislative authority. That authority is confined to Congress. So if Congress doesn't do away with it, it's unauthoritative, and we wouldn't want any president to have that power. That's more power than an 18th century monarch. Same thing is true when it comes to unilaterally imposing tariff rates by one person. It's just so absurd, and that's being mulled in the courtroom right now. But I don't think the Trump administration has done away with affirmative action. We just saw what disaster relief would look like in a Trump world, and that's that if you criticize Israel, you're not going to get disaster relief funding. This was a story that came up a few weeks ago. Glenn Greenwald and others covered it, but it's a fiasco. There are affirmative action carve-outs. They're just not in the same manner or in the same flavor as the liberal ones.
It's hard to see how it will proceed from here, but it's been a huge change. He's turned out to be a very significant president.
You were saying last night at dinner that people often say the Democratic Party, when it takes power again, as it will at some point, will be a lot more radical. But you were saying maybe that's not correct.
I don't know what they will have the capacity to do. I don't, you say, well, how will people respond if President Ocasio-Cortez says, we're going to have, affirmative action and drag queen story hour again.
I see the Democrats moving away from that. They see that generally as a losing issue. Some of them are digging their heels on it, but even Ocasio-Cortez, she's not bringing those issues up as much. She removed the pronouns from her bio. Things like that show me that, they might cling to those same notions and those same ideas still personally, but they don't see it as a winning political vehicle. So much of that is being discarded. Now, will they be more radical in terms of wealth redistribution in the welfare state and wars? Yeah, I think so. The Democratic Party has moved in those directions, regardless of the culture war issues.
I just don't know. But I do think the Democratic Party is probably going to, it's going to find something to, some way to radicalize.
I see it changing.
Do you see it changing?
Yes, I do.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It feels like the term racist has lost its sting, like almost completely.
Yeah, that is true. Same with the word anti-Semitism, by the way, which is the right's new favorite word to attribute to anyone making reasonable criticisms of Israel or U.S. policy toward Israel. It's hard to know where the Democratic Party is going. I think they're maintaining a more pro-war milquetoast direction going forward, with someone like Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer potentially winning in 2028. The nomination. We'll see what happens, but we already know the civil war that played out between the establishment and more of the dissident left in 2016 and the Hillary versus Bernie show. And the Democratic establishment was not willing to allow Bernie's influence to stick. That's for sure. Same thing played out in the Republican side in 2012 with Romney versus Ron Paul. They basically ignored Ron Paul, even when he was winning certain states like Iowa, and they changed the rules on the floor of the RNC to make sure his delegates wouldn't count for as much. You see these schemes play out all the time. What we know is no matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain. So I actually think the Democratic Party is becoming less radical, relatively speaking, on issues like the culture war and wokeness. Actually, they're drawing those things back because it's just a losing strategy. We've seen that time and time again. But they are radicalizing more in the direction of being pro-war, pro-welfare, and, plunge us into more debt when we're $37 trillion in debt and our money is becoming more and more worthless because of how much money the central bank is printing to finance it. That's where I see them radicalizing, and I don't see that trajectory changing anytime soon. But I do want to hear from you. Is the Democratic Party changing? What will happen after Trump's presidency? How will the Republican and Democratic parties change? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Tucker. Great interview here. I appreciated it. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel. And as a gift for that, I'll give you all of my videos before they go live to the general public on my channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.